Vote or die, mother, vote or die. Rock the vote or else I'm gonna stick a knife through your eye.
Hey guys, welcome to The Move, Anti-Establishment Till I Die, a look at New Jersey's independent candidates for governor in 2017. Let me hip you to something right quick that you may not realize. New Jersey has a fruitful political plantation. It's so damn big that there are actually a lot of people who are completely unaware they're even on it. Let me help you out. If your funding or income comes from the state, and yes, that includes the social programs like Section 8 and SNAP, then jump down, turn around, pick a pail of cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a pail of hay. Look, I've even spent time on the plantation this summer. Check out the 5 interesting aspects of being black video to get my takeaways from that experience. I'm tired of having my arm tied behind my back when it comes to the options we have as legitimate political contenders. It's the same groove that happened during the presidential, and we wound up with a Trump presidency. Clinton took New Jersey easily during that race, but that's to be expected when there's almost 1 million more Democrats in the state. Phil Murphy is going to win this race, and we are doomed to higher taxes and broken promises. But that has literally been the case no matter who wins any election since democracy became a thing. I've been saturated in politics for the last 5 years, and I've watched this particular race as closely as someone in my position can. I saw big money come through and slam dance any and all opposition. And as the election draws near, the big establishment guns are coming out and swinging hard, including President Obama, 23% poverty, Bill Clinton, NAFTA and the crime bill, and Joe Biden, who I really think is just the coolest guy, but he's been there through it all, so yeah, come to. This video isn't going to make an ounce of difference in the upcoming election. All we can do is brace ourselves because much harder times are coming. But I have a platform, and with the help of NJ.com, please don't flag me, here are some clips from the independents that will be on the ballot because, like the title implies, anti-establishment till I die. I know there's still 28 on deck, but as you can tell, schedule be damned. Enjoy.
Well, I'm running for governor this year because it started about 12 years ago, my journey, where I ran for local office, and on the second try, I actually won. And a couple years later, I became mayor of my town, Long Hill Township in Morris County. And you learn right away what a budget is, what you're delivering services. I'm also a small business owner, so it was a big fascination for me and of interest. And you also get the number one question from everybody, which is, what are you going to do about my property taxes? Mm-hmm. And this was in 2006, before the big crash, and people were still somewhat concerned about it. And I just looked around and I found this 120-year-old idea about municipal consolidation and school regionalization that has been floated around New Jersey for 120 years. And I said, well, who's going to tell the public? Who's going to be a resource? How are we going to make inroads on this rather than just talk about it? So I saw the problem, and then I wanted to implement a solution. And so in 2009, I founded and serve as executive director of a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization called Courage to Connect New Jersey. And what I have done and my organization has done for the past 8 years is work around the state, probably in 60, 70 communities, working on consolidation, school regionalization, fire district consolidation, as well as county level services to try to address our high property taxes. I was tremendously successful. But I did learn one thing. If we don't have state support, nothing will change in New Jersey. And that's why I felt a little frustrated. And I said, my journey has taken me here. And I have this acumen. And I understand that there's leaders out in New Jersey that want to make changes. I've worked with them, taxpayers, elected officials, and they need a leader. And so I'm really running because this is the formula for change in New Jersey. The entire country pays $300 billion in property taxes, and New Jersey is nearing $30 billion. That's 10% of the entire country. That's staggering. And so if there's any elected official, if there's anyone in New Jersey that says we cannot address this issue, they shouldn't be elected. And then one more really hit me. I was speaking in Gloucester Township as executive director of Courage to Connect New Jersey, and this gentleman got up and he said, 10 years ago, I worked 4 weeks to pay my property taxes, and now I work 10 weeks. 10 weeks just to pay your property taxes. So our organization did a survey monkey, And it came up that 54% of the people said it takes 2 to 3 months. What are we doing to our residents? And there's one other thing, Brent, too, that we have to be mindful of. The state budget, 44% of the state budget goes back to fund local governments and schools. This is a huge issue. So on the micro level and on the macro level, we need to face this issue and we need to address it. And we have had the first steps in New Jersey. We just need a governor that's a leader to really work on this issue. And that's why I believe it's very easy to reduce property taxes by 15% in 4 years, not look at ways to fund it, which is pensions. It's not an easy issue to talk about. It's not glamorous, and people have to realize that it could take us to our knees. It's really a serious, serious issue that needs to be addressed, not just by funding it, but reining in some of the corruption around it, some of the double dipping, some of the ways that we say we're going to fund your pension. In other words, instead of saying the last 2 or 3 years, we really should say it's an aggregate of your lifetime salary, which is how most pensions are, and try to make quite a few reforms and also fund it. But everyone is going to have to get hurt when we address this issue, and it's looming. And I just hope that New Jersey doesn't do what it just did, like the transportation fund, which is wait till the last day before they react.
Yeah, so again, my name is Matt Riccardi. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran, as is Pete, and so I can't say that I'm the only one, but I stepped up to the plate because I've got a family. And New Jersey is falling off a cliff. I mean, there's so many statistics that we could sit here and we could talk about that are staggering, and Gina highlighted some of it, and the media has, talked about a little bit of it. But the reality is that we've got $67,200 taxpayer burden per person. We've got, the worst pension crisis in the country. We're $232 billion in debt, plus another $57 billion worth of retiree health care that has not been reported by the state. We've got number one in foreclosures. I deliver foreclosures the last 7 years. I've literally looked into the faces of people here in New Jersey from the top all the way down to the bottom. They are the forgotten people of this state, people who cannot pay their property taxes, who cannot pay their bills. Therefore, they are left behind and they're unable to afford to even live in their own homes. So you've got a myriad of problems. Number one, worst in business climate. We're the worst in economic outlook. We're the worst in so many different areas. 11 credit downgrades. The state is falling apart. So the reality is what kind of a state do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a state that I used to have a joke that I would use at the beginning, but I have so many friends in Mississippi, so I don't know if I should use it. But I would say, they've already decided that they're going to rename New Jersey in 4 years from now. I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but yeah, they're going to rename it to New Mississippi because we're going to be vying in 4 years for the least coveted title in America, the worst state to live, which typically is Mississippi. And because we're falling off of a cliff, we cannot afford to pay our bills, and people cannot afford to live in this state. That's why millennials are fleeing, right? Only millennial running, yeah, all right? So that's why millennials are running out of this state, because we cannot afford to live here. They're living, number one state for millennials living with their parents, number one state for millennials running out of the state and going other places, businesses fleeing, people fleeing. No one wants to live here anymore because we cannot afford to live here. So the biggest issue in America is hands down its leadership, right? So leadership is the biggest issue. The reason why we have all of these problems here in our state is because of our lack of leadership for probably the past 50 years. And you're talking about from the president, throughout the legislature, throughout the Congress, the judiciary, everywhere around the state, even the governorships across our country, there has just been a lack of leadership. And that's also because of the fact that we've polarized so much. We've demonized each other. If you're on the left, you're on the right, is demonized. If you give up a single inch on an issue, you're afraid that the other side's going to take it and pull it back. And we see what that does. When in World War II, we know that that there was so much propaganda and rhetoric that was spread. They were so demonized that they were the bloodiest battles ever fought between us and the Japanese out in the Pacific. And we see that that's what's going on here in America for the past 50 years, from the words that are being used even by the president himself, down to the public, down within our school system. There's a lack of respect because of the polarization, because we don't want to give up on that issue. So when we talk about leadership, what does that look like? We need to be able to bring out the Constitution, and we need to be able to look at it and say that that's what we coalesce around. Whether or not people are taking a stand and how they take their stand, we need to figure out whether or not it's their right to do so. And if it is their right to do so and we disagree with it, how to respectfully disagree. The only way to do that is to have leadership that shows you. One of the biggest issues that we heard about earlier this year was that the Jewish community in Lakewood, a bunch of millionaires was stealing money from a system for the impoverished. How does that happen? Well, it happens all the time across America because that's what you have the people in the leadership doing. You have bribes, you have fraud, you have backroom deals, you have people taking $13 million worth of the public's taxpayer dollars in order to run for an elected position. I refuse to take a paycheck. I will donate my paycheck, guaranteed the day that you elect me. I will pass that off and you can vote on the charities that I give it to. I will not take a paycheck. Why? Because it's leadership. Could I use that money? Sure, but I don't want to run this position because I want to get rich like most politicians do. My goal is to be your representative, not your ruler. So we need leadership, and leadership will make the difference here in New Jersey because leadership changes everything. If you can go back to the Constitution and say this policy's wrong, even though I kind of like that because that's kind of my leaning, the reality is when you look at the Constitution, it has to fit. If it doesn't fit in the box, we can't have it because this is America and that is the law of the land. That's the key.
I've spent a lifetime, my entire life, adult lifetime has been spent in service to everyone. Between my service as a United States Marine Corps rifleman, I spent time as a volunteer firefighter. I spent 20 years as a volunteer athletic coach in New Jersey. And on top of that too, I was also spent a lot of time working with the youth of Newark doing outreach educational programs. So my entire life is all about service. Running for governor is just the next step in my life to provide service for my fellow man. I believe I'm here for a purpose, that is to serve you, not myself. So that is why I'm running. It's a good question to ask. It depends on who you ask, but for the majority of people out there, the biggest issue is taxation. Yes, running as a libertarian, my platform is typical libertarian style, everything's freedom oriented. But the focal point of my campaign is my tax plan. My tax plan, I'm the author of what's called fiscal democracy. All right, fiscal democracy, how this works. Now, between all the different places where you pay taxes in New Jersey, between your sales tax, gas tax, your income tax, even your vehicle registration fees, all of that, that amounts to about 30% of your income. Under my plan called fiscal democracy, what we do is we introduce a constitutional amendment. We cap that at 10% with the added bonus of you get to decide what to do with that money through your weekly paycheck deductions. There's no more property tax, no more gas tax, no more sales tax. The only thing we have is an income tax at 10%. You get to decide what to fund and what to defund. If you like your local school district, you put some money into that. If you like your local park system, you put some money into that. If you want to take some money out of the state arts endowment program and defund that, you're welcome to do that. This takes out a lot of hostility and animosity that people have towards their government, right? Most of us are forced between your Democrats, Republicans. They all want to take away one of your liberties and give themselves their own liberties. Under my plan, what we're doing is we're moving appropriations into your hands. You get to decide where the money goes. Right now, okay, the biggest power that government has is monopoly of force. Okay, the government is the only entity that can put a gun in your face and say, hey, do something, right? They're the ones who can legally do it. Their second biggest power is appropriations. They come up with budgets and they force you to pay whatever it is. Under my plan, fiscal democracy, we move appropriations away from irresponsible legislators and we put it into your hands. You get to decide what programs are important. If you like your county park system, you can fund it. If there's anything you don't like, you can defund it. Here's another good example too. This creates competition for your tax dollars. Okay, we see competition enriches our lives everywhere, in the economics, in production, in athletics. There's no competition for your tax dollars. Under my plan, the municipal government, the state government, and the county government are all fighting for those dollars. They have to give you a better service or you can defund them. This puts power in your hands. This is what the framers of the Constitution intended us to have, whereas power was in the hands of the people. That's my tax plan. I think that's where everybody's really focused on was that. Other than that, we're worried about other things like victimless crime. We're worried about age of majority. We're talking about guns, drugs, anything you want to talk about. But the focal point of my campaign right now is on the tax plan, and it is to empower everybody to run a government the way you see fit. Yes, the war on drugs. This is a big problem. There's a growing international police union right now. It's called LEAP. I think it's called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition or something like that. This war on drugs is harming 100 times more people than it is helping. If you consider the fact, if you have an addiction to like heroin, marijuana, whatever it is this a medical problem or are you criminal? Right? Think about that. Do you belong in jail if you have an addiction problem? No, you don't. okay? The number one demographic of people that are harmed by the war on drugs are the people that are incarcerated for it. And the number two demographic of people that are injured by it, believe it or not, police officers. And this is where a lot of divide comes in our environment right now, because police officers are forced to fight a war they can't possibly win. The war on drugs started in the 30s, and it's getting worse and worse and worse every year. Imagine if you're a police officer, you pull somebody over the side of the road, and that person has a small usable amount of like heroin, marijuana, whatever it is in their pocket. 10% of those people that are roadside will use violence to get away from the situation because they're either A, going to get locked up for 5 years, or B, the police are going to force them to roll over on a very violent upstream drug dealer. There's no option there. So some of them, 10%, will use violence against a police officer. Now, this is what's caused an escalation on both sides. Police officers, citizenry, and it's getting out of control.
So my wife and I are co-pastors of the Reformed Church of Highland Park. We've been there since 2001, so 16 years we've been in place. And I've been a community organizer and a community activist the whole time that I've been in ministry. Some of the things that I've done, I've built a housing corporation that now has 23 buildings, and we house 125 people. And our tenants are homeless veterans. That was our response to the Iraq War. Youth aging out of foster care. That was our response to the crisis of young people bouncing around the system as children and being emancipated into poverty. We've built housing for chronically homeless, mentally ill adults. We have those houses in Newark, New Brunswick, and in Highland Park. We have housing for Rutgers students who are coming out of prison through the Mountain View program. So we have a whole house just dedicated to making sure students coming out of prison have a place to live. So that's one project. We have a Global Grace Cafe where every chef is a refugee or an asylee. We have an immigration visitation program where we go to the detention centers around the state and make sure that people coming to this country feel loved and respected, even though they're locked up in jail and treated like criminals when they're seeking asylum. So that's the kind of thing I've done throughout my life, and that's me in a nutshell. So let me tell you why I'm running for governor and then lead it into there. Yeah. So the theme of my platform is the last are first, and a scripture text that matters to me is the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And we say that thing, we practice that in my community, and we walk out into a New Jersey where the first are first are first are first. And I think it's actually a dangerous way to run a world, when you first have to line the pockets of those at the top, and when you hope that there's enough of a trickle to meet the middle, you never have anything left for those who are last. So I believe in a wellspring from below mentality, and that if a society is really going to thrive, you ought to look very carefully and listen well to the people who've been left out, the people who structurally are left out of systems. And that's what I do in my ministry, and I believe that that's what we need in New Jersey. We need to start with the last being first. And I believe it's the reason why 61% of the voters didn't come out last time. Those who were registered to vote didn't come out to vote. I think people feel like they belong to the flyover communities of New Jersey, those places that never get touched by politicians. And that's where I've started each and every day of my campaign, is talking to those who've been left out.
So do you have an issue that's important to you, and what would you do about it? Mm-hmm.
So if the last are first, then no one should ever lose the right to vote. A vote is a vote is a vote. A human should never lose their ability to be a human. So if people go to jail, they're voting. If the last are first, then if you're in jail, you shouldn't be making $1 a day as an indentured servant, especially when we have the worst black to white ratio in a prison system of almost any state around. So these are issues that matter if the last are first. If the last are first, then the 500,000 people living in New Jersey who are undocumented need to be protected with sanctuary state status. They need to be able to get driver's licenses, and their children need to be respected. If the last are first, then the 438,000 kids that live in this state in households that bring in under $30,000 a year need to be treated with dignity and respect, and their families need to be eligible for housing vouchers if their families are that poor, and need to be given all the types of services that can allow them to thrive, and their families need $15 an hour minimum wage. So those are the last or first agenda items. But people say, how do you pay for all that? And the beauty of all this is a lot of the things that matter to the last also matter to the middle. Single payer Medicare for all is my single biggest issue, and I believe that if we could get that right, we would deal with issues around property taxes. We would deal with the pension and benefit fund. We would deal with the inability to help pay for the tuition costs in our state universities and community colleges. All of these things would happen much better if we had single payer Medicare for all. It would dramatically reduce the amount of money that we waste on the private, unregulated health insurance companies that are a huge part of why our property taxes are so high. About 20% of our property taxes in all 565 towns go to pay for unregulated health insurance. We could dramatically reduce that with single payer Medicare for all.